All right, in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at several of the common mistakes that beginners will often make with HTML and CSS and how we can mitigate some of those mistakes early on using Visual Studio Code and a few additional plugins, along with some tips and tricks along the way when you are mocking out and creating HTML websites. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, now the first thing you're seeing here is a basic HTML site. Now, if you followed along with my video, the responsive web design series, I have a playlist for that, a link here in the card or description. You'll sort of end up at this point. So you have this sort of HTML mockup over here, and then we have our HTML and CSS over here on the left side of the page in the Visual Studio Code. So the first thing I want to show you is I get this question often is how do I have in my videos, my own videos I record, how do I have it to where when I save stuff over here, so I have like header test, and as soon as I save, you'll notice that that automatically updated over there in the code. I'm going to show you how you can do that in Visual Studio Code with a plugin. Now what you want to do is you want to come down here to this little icon right here in the sidebar. This is the extensions or plugins icon. And you're going to want to search for the one called Live Server. And then let me pull this out here. But this is the one right here. You're going to click on this live server one, and you're going to just install it. Now that's pretty much it. You just need to install the live server plugin, and from then on, you can do what I'm doing. There's only one gotcha that you have to realize when working with the live server plugin, and that is you have to open up a folder instead of a file in VS Code. So I couldn't open up just a single HTML file and then preview that file in my browser with live server. Instead, what you have to do is you have to say File, Open Folder. So when you open up a folder, you'll of course navigate to wherever your files are stored, and you'll click on the actual folder. The folder should have your HTML, CSS, images, JavaScript, or any other files that are part of your project. But you want to open up the folder. Once you open up that folder, you'll see all of those files in the left-hand sidebar here. And once you've got that open, there's two ways you can do this. I'm going to go ahead and kill mine or kill this command. It's on port 15501 right now. I'm going to close that. You can click that to dispose. So once that process has been killed, this is how you'll launch live server. You can right click any HTML file. Another common mistake is people will be in the CSS file and they'll try to launch live server from here and it won't work. You have to be in your HTML file. You can just simply right click and say open with live server. So that's method one. Or if you have your project file open, you can just come down here to the bottom right and you can just click the Go Live button. So as soon as I click Go Live, you'll notice that my web browser launches and refreshes over here, and then now it's live. So any changes I make inside of here, so watch this, for example, this content area. Any changes I make in here, I'll say test area. As soon as I hit Command S to save or file save, it automatically refreshes your browser window and updates that without you having to go back and forth. So that's a really handy trick when you're starting out to be able to, prevent, saving, switching programs, refreshing, all that. It'll do it automatically for you. So that's how you do that. Again, if you need to close live server for whatever reason, sometimes it'll get a hiccup in there and you need to close that. You can just click this little cancel button down here to close the port down and then go ahead and relaunch it as needed. So you just click the Go Live button and it should pop up another instance. Make sure to close the old one. Okay, so that is plugin number one. Plugin number two is going to help you with specifically your HTML. So we're going to come over here again to the extensions library. And the one you're going to search for here is an extension that is a hinting extension. So this one's going to be called HTML Hint. You can see it was already there in my preview. So this is the little plugin right here. You're going to click on this one and then click the install button and that will install this plugin. And I'll show you how this one can really help save you a lot of troubleshooting hours with your HTML specifically. So in this case, I've already got this, of course, installed. So I'm going to come over here to my HTML. And what this plugin does is it will highlight errors and issues with your HTML. So you may look at this document right here and you may say, oh, great, everything looks okay, but there's actually several issues with it. And in order to see those issues, if you don't have this already down here in the bottom, you go to your View menu and you can go down to this one called Problems. So the problems will pop up this panel. It's likely open by default on your screen, but if for some reason you accidentally closed it, go to the View and then down to Problems. And what this extension does, this HTML extension, is it will list out the issues with your HTML right here. So you can see right away it's telling me, hey, doc type must be declared first. So if I come up here to this little squiggly yellow line, that's where the issue is. It's saying you need to have a doc type in your document. And I say, oh, sure enough, right? So I would need to come up in here and I need to add my doc type. of HTML. Okay, so as soon as I save that, you can see that that error goes away. There's no longer a squiggly line on that HTML tag, so I'm good to go. Let's see another one. So it says, oh, apparently the title tag must be present in the head tag. So here I have my opening head and my closing head tag, but I don't have a title tag. So I need to add that. So I'll come up here and I'll say title, and I'll say this is the page title, and then I'll close that title tag, save, and you'll see sure enough that title updated right over here inside of my browser preview, and that little squiggly error went away. So those are kind of nice little features. Perhaps one of the most beneficial that I think is it will help you find missing closing tags. So with HTML5, this is a little trickier because not all tags are required to be closed, but it's good practice to always close your tag. For example, if I have this main div down here and I just deleted the closing tag, it's really hard when you have a lot of HTML to be able to see that. And VS Code by default just highlights the matching tags, but you can't really tell there's a problem, right, with your HTML unless you have a really keen eye and go over this. But with this extension, you can see right away it says this tag must be paired. So I click on that and it's like, oh, there's an issue. I'm missing a closing div tag, right? It tells me where the starting div tag is, and then, tells me there's an issue with it. So then I can realize, well, I need to go fix that thing. So I can come over here and figure out where that missing div. So as soon as I put that missing div back in, the error goes away and my HTML is now clean. So that is another excellent extension. Now, fix, or I guess, I don't know, in no particular order here. Another common problem that beginners will face is that they get their code indenting wrong. So, they may have this over here and they may have this one backed up over here and this one like this, and I'll just kind of mess this all up a little bit, right? And their code is all indented funny, and it's hard to tell visually where tags open and where they close and what's going on in this particular instance. So built into VS Code, you don't need any special plugin for this, is what's called an HTML formatter. And I use these all the time. So when I'm writing code or something, or I'm adding HTML or deleting HTML, something might be goofed up, and I just want to reformat my entire document. So all you need to do is you can press the F1 command, or you go up here to the Go. Let's see, I can't remember which menu it's under these days. It's under View, and then go to Command Palette. F1 keyboard shortcut should pull this up as well. And then you just you start to type in the word format, and it should pop up this little command called format document. So as soon as you say FOR, right, this will pop up. It's at the top of my list because I use this often, so it's in my recently used list. So as soon as I click this, you can see that magically all my HTML gets automatically fixed in one single command. So do that often to make sure that all your HTML is properly indented and it's all much more human readable. So that's the formatter command that you'll want to use. So now I've formatted this document with those couple of plugins. It's now a perfect HTML document. The last thing you may want to do is you can actually validate the document. So if for some reason I want to just make sure that there's no issues with my HTML, you can do a Command A or select all to highlight all of your code. And there are actually plugins that will do this for you as well, but you have to install some extra components. So I'm going to copy this by Command C, come over here to my internet, and I'm just going to go to the validator, which is in the W3C. So I can go to validator.w3.org, and then I just click this tab here by direct input, and then I just paste. So I'm going to paste all my HTML code and say check. And this will run it against the official markup validator in W3C to make sure that everything's in compliance. So I look through here and it says, good job. There's no errors. I do have one small suggestion, and that says on this line 7 here, you can say, it says, I don't need this trailing slash. That comes over from XHTML. With HTML, we no longer need those. So that's kind of an optional thing. It's not going to hurt or help anything. So maybe I want to go just delete that trailing slash right there because it's no longer needed. So there's a suggestion. Again, it's not telling me that's an error. It's just mostly a suggestion. Okay, so that's kind of that last thing you can do to your HTML. So now let's look at the opposite side of things in the CSS and see how we can fix things there as well. So I'm going to come over here to my CSS file. And this is the CSS that follows along, of course, with this little CSS mockup over here on the right-hand side of the page. And the exact same thing exists in CSS as far as a formatter goes. So I'm going to mess stuff up, right? I'm going to hit tab and break things and mess up all these property names. This is really, something that happens all the time, right? You have so much code and stuff that things get messy, especially when you have media queries like this. You can see this one's already broken. The formatting's incorrect. So again, it's the same command. So F1 or go to that document, just type in format document. Simply click the command, and that automatically fixes all my CSS. Notice how that automatically fixed that media query. Those two nested rules are now properly indented, and all those other breaking things I made up here are all properly indented. So then I can just save, and right away, that will help you spot more issues, because if you can get your code correctly formatted, oftentimes you'll see, oh, I was missing a semicolon, right? When you delete the semicolon there, you get these output errors down here, problems as well. So then I can, undo that. Another helpful feature is over here in the sidebar. See how this is kind of hard to see, but see how there's a little red mark there, red mark there, red mark there? That's telling me that there's errors around those sections. So if I'm clear down here in my document and something's not working right, you can always visually see in the sidebar, oh, there's some errors on these lines. So I can scroll my browser up to that section, and sure enough, they have this little red squiggly line underneath those properties. That's telling me that something's broken in this area. Okay, so the issue was that I deleted that semicolon on line 12. And so the error is actually on line 13. It's telling me there's an error on line 13 and line 15, but actually the error is right above it because it's missing a semicolon. So CSS thought that all of this code was part of the grid properly, which is invalid, right? Because that missing semicolon. So often when you see those errors, look right above the red, and that will many times help you locate the error, maybe right after. Okay, so let's save that. That is a CSS formatter, which should help you a lot as well. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is the responsive design tools, and I get this question all the time as well. So when we're making a responsive website, I'm going to hide these guys down so we can see the code a little bit better. So in this particular example, nothing is a very, I suppose it's fairly standard here. Except down here, I do have one media query. So at 480 pixels is when my media query is supposed to break or change or do something. And, I'll see people all the time trying to resize their browser to make those media queries happen. But there's a thing built into all web browsers that will do this for you. So I'm going to add, let's just add a property in here. And I'm going to change let's see, where's this red coming from? I think the red is in my site wrap. Yeah, so I'm going to change the background color of my site wrap. We already have a rule here for it. So I'm just going to change this to something different here. So we'll go purple. We don't use that color. So when the media query hits this, again, I can just do my formatter, hit F1, format my document. It'll fix that little thing. When the media query hits, my background color should turn purple. So, right, I can sit over here and go, well, when's that media query going to hit, right? I actually can't even resize my browser small enough to get the 480 pixels to hit. So what you do instead, and this works in Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, I think it works in all browsers. There's one thing you need to do if you're working in Safari to make this work. I'll show you. But I think I'll write over here in Firefox. So I can right click, and the command is called inspect. So you simply choose inspect, and then it brings up this dialog. Probably by default, it's docked down here at the bottom, but you can click these little buttons to undock it if you want. But the command I want you to pay attention to is it's this little teeny tiny icon right there. It looks kind of like two little smartphone icons or something, but that takes you into responsive design mode. So click that icon and your browser will change. And then this is going to allow you to grab these handles. You can see, and I can resize my browser without changing the width of my actual browser screen. So it's like a browser inside of a browser. It's a little preview mode. And you can do some presets up here. I can switch my mode to, let's say what an iPad looks like. Or maybe I want to see what the Galaxy Note looks like. Or you just manually drag it, okay? So let's see if this works. So again, it's 480. So I'm looking here at this value right there. It's 1466 right now. So I'm going to cruise all the way down until we get to 480. Now this background color should go purple when I get below 480. So right about, getting close, right there. And sure enough, it turns purple. That's how you can check and your responsive design media queries. Just in this mode, that'll allow you to easily resize and double check, and you can see everything's functioning correctly here. This little div right here, which is called the profile div, is hidden on the mobile view. So when we get to mobile view, you should see that one completely disappear. Yep, sure enough, it's gone. And I can see over here, right, that profile div I have set to display none inside of that media query. So that's the way you can double check all your breakpoints if you're doing responsive web design in this preview. Now, in all the browsers, this is enabled by default. When you right click and you say inspect element, I'm going to close out of this mode. When you right click and say inspect. However, in Safari, it is not on by default. So in Safari, you have to go inside of your browser. You have to go to File, and then preferences. Now this is not going to show you correctly because I'm not in Safari, but you'll have several tabs. You're going to go to the advanced tab, and then down at the bottom, there's a little checkbox that says show develop menu. You check that on if you're in Safari. And then after that, when you right click, you'll see this little inspect option. So you have to do that extra step, but you only have to do that once. All right. That is that little trick. So the last little couple of things I'm going to show you here are just common questions that I get with this specific layout from people who are following along with the series. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. Now, this portion is what I call the CSS wireframe. And whenever you have a CSS wireframe, it matches, the widths and heights sort of match how you drew them in your Figma or XD or whatever you're designing your website in. But the problem becomes is when you start adding actual content into the content area and things like that, all of these hard-coded values of pixel heights that we got from those, design tools are going to be incorrect. And here's a prime example. So right now I have the height set to on my site wrap, right? That's the HTML tag that wraps my entire website. So I have that set to a height of 100 viewport height units. And the viewport height is basically the height of your browser window. So in other words, that red background color, that div is going to be 100% tall all of the time. And that works except if these divs ever get larger than the height of my browser window. There's going to be a problem, and I'm going to demonstrate that. So let's take this one right here, this content test area, and I'm just going to increase this something really high. Let's go like, instead of 294 pixels, let's go 1294 and hit save. So you can see now this content area is really, really large, and as soon as I start to scroll, you see the problem, right? That div is no longer containing. Let's go clear up to 1700. So that background div, my site wrap, because its height is set to 100% viewport, now the content inside is larger than that, and it just breaks, right? I have an overflow issue to where all my content is overflowing the parent container. And this red div is not stretching out like it's supposed to, or like I want it to. So instead, it would probably be better to set this height of my element, instead of a fixed height, I can give it a min-height. Min height means be at least this tall and allow it to stretch if the content stretches. So now when I save, I come over here, you'll see I scroll down. That's what I want, right? I want that background element to stretch because this green div or whatever's content is stretching as well. So that min height property is going to be your friend for things like that to allow for accommodating heights or widths. We also have min width. So if you want to accommodate things this way, min width. Now the exact same problem exists in our grid template rows. I'm going to undo these. Well, I guess I can leave that, but you can see that if I guess I'll go back to the default and switch this back again. I just hit Command Z to undo. Okay, so right now, our column, our row number 1, which is our header, has a fixed height of 142 pixels. The row 2, which is this featured header, has a fixed height of 294. This one's 294, that one's 294. And then our footer is 100 pixels. And so now we have the opposite problem where our site is too small and I want my footer to stretch out. I want it to fill this available space down here at the bottom so it's not kind of this weird cutoff thing. So what I can do is instead of having a fixed height on the footer, I'm going to set that to the 1FR, 1 fraction, which allows it to stretch. Go ahead and save. Perfect. Now my footer will fill any available space at the bottom of the screen if there is available space. So that's another thing to make it more responsive. And then we got to get rid of a few of these fixed height elements. Now the header row, this row right here, that probably needs to be fixed height. That's going to be my logo, my menu, things like that that don't change. However, this area, my content area, is definitely going to grow and shrink depending on the content, right, that goes inside of that, how much stuff is in there. So that content div is this one right here. That's the third row, right? 1, 2, 3. So that's the third row element. So instead of having a fixed value here, better would be to have there's a value in here in the CSS grid. It's called min-content. And it's very similar to the min height, but it basically says the size of this div has to be at least tall enough to accommodate the content. And it'll keep stretching as long as the content grows. So as soon as I save this, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. You'll notice that that div collapses down to be the height of the content. But now the benefit we get here is if the content grows, that div will keep growing to accommodate that. So I'm going to come back here to my HTML just to mock this up. Let's go to the content area right here. And I'll add a couple of paragraphs of lorem ipsum or something like that. So we'll come over here and I'm just going to copy this paragraph and we'll just paste it down a bunch of times. So paste, 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 paste. So I have a whole bunch of paragraphs, and sure enough, you can see as the content grows, that green div is going to grow and grow and grow and grow. Notice the footer shrinks. And if I get more and more content that outgrows my viewport, just paste that a whole bunch more times, it still stretches, the footer is set still, the main set still, and that background, that red div is still stretching as well. So that's something that you'll need to do in your CSS files as you start to, convert over from your wireframe to your actual content. You probably will likely need to go into a few spots and remove some of those hard-coded values that you used from your design files and replace them with min heights or min contents to allow your site to stretch and flow according to the content of the unknowns. So that's pretty much it as far as a few of these tips and tricks for your CSS and HTML files. Hopefully those will help you, especially those starting out, right? It's really frustrating when you're missing a semicolon or you're missing something, you spend a couple of hours trying to figure it out, but where these plugins may be able to clue you in and fix those problems just a little bit sooner. Okay, so that is the main thing. The other common issue I see, I guess my last closing thing here is always double check to make sure your grid area right here matches up with what you've called it here, right? The grid area name has to be the name of your grid template areas here. So those can't be different. And you also can't use spaces. So occasionally I'll see where people will see like featured header and they'll say featured space header and they'll come up here and say featured space header. And that's illegal. You can't do spaces in these names. You have to do an underscore. So make sure you have an underscore there and then an underscore there if you're going to have multi-line or multi-word grid area names. All right, that's it for this tutorial today. Hope you learned a tip or trick. Comment down below on what things are tripping you up or any other things you'd like me to cover with HTML and CSS for beginners. And we got some new tutorials coming out soon, so looking forward to see those, and we'll see you in the next one.